Hi, I'm Jerica Shong. Welcome to the stream. As always, we are starting off with our pre-show where we have a chance to talk about some of the issues of the day. We will be going to live broadcast shortly, and after the show, we will be in our post-show experience where we'll have a chance to have a deeper conversation with you about some of these issues that have come up. With me today, Ahmed and Sarah. Great to see you both. Ahmed, tell me a little bit about what has been going on in the news.
In the news, well, this is something that was posted a couple days ago on the Migrant Workers Task Force, which is a volunteer-based initiative in Lebanon. And they've got some great videos to draw attention to basically migrant workers in Lebanon. We know that many people there work as domestic help and other kinds of help. What's interesting about this is they're really trying to showcase their work, but also empower the migrants themselves to demand essentially their rights. So let's just watch the first video because it does a better job of explaining it maybe even than I do. There you go. So this is obviously inspired by cheesy Welcome to Lebanon videos, which we can get to a bit later, but let's just watch this. So not so surprising, because 85% of domestic workers in Lebanon are not allowed a day off. So, you know, anyone who's been to Lebanon notices this. It's anywhere really across the Arab world. This happens very frequently. It's not just Lebanon, but it's nice, this initiative, you know, to really draw attention
and so
to it.
It's basically giving the impression that this woman, it shows that she seems to be having fun shopping, but it turns out she's actually working for this other woman.
Yeah.
Right. You know, the reality behind that video is that usually a domestic worker, or a migrant worker, in Lebanon, they're actually usually wearing a uniform with some kind of white bib, and they don't look like she does, very carefree. They usually head down, certain feet step, you know,
they
behind
took certain
their
creative
owner.
liberties.
Yeah, they definitely did.
The video.
But the interesting thing for me is
carefree.
like they really did highlight something that you often see again across the region, but also specifically in Lebanon, where you'll see like a an affluent woman or a Lebanese woman with her domestic help a couple steps behind her, you know, and they're always carrying shopping bags. Like that perhaps is the most stereotypical, but it really does happen.
Well, you know, we did the story about the Dubai Sally blog. That was actually a blog that was written about from the perspective of a migrant worker, although we announced it, the woman outed herself on this show that she wasn't actually a domestic worker. Right. She had simply been living in Dubai and seen how people were treated. And it seems to be, as Ahmed mentioned, something that's across the region. I'm curious of your thoughts, Sarah. Like, where do you think culturally this comes from, the idea that somebody coming from another place is not perhaps subject to the same kind of hospitality as a person from that country?
I feel like that part of the world has this kind of attitude. They put the Arabs in one bracket and then they put, other populations in another. This has kind of been there since the beginning, I feel.
I want to show one more video really quickly, just from that same same series. So 80% of domestic workers not allowed to leave the house. And in this video, we saw them wearing the kind of uniform that you were speaking about before, Sarah.
Yeah. You know, one thing here also to keep in mind is that a lot of, in this video they're showing, people of color, a lot of times in Lebanon, these people are undocumented. And so they can't leave because there are checkpoints everywhere and they were going to get card and ask for ID. And if they do so, it's straight to jail or detention or possibly deployment back to their home country. Lebanon is just full of undocumented workers.
Migrant workers, even Palestinian refugees.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really,
Iraqis,
for a small
Sudanese.
country, it's packed. But, it's also worth mentioning that I really am excited by the fact that this is, as it says right here on their page, 100% volunteer coordinated, led and staffed. And that they're...
Can you zoom into that?
Yeah, there you go. My monitor's not working.
Okay, no
slight
worries.
mishap, no worries. But I think it's coming across on the live stream. But here it says we aim to transform society by actively changing attitudes, perceptions of migrant workers, and empowering them to fight for themselves. because, you know, the reason I mentioned the volunteer aspect is Lebanon is a beautiful country. It is known in the Arab world as one of the countries where you can go on vacation. Many people go from the Gulf in the wintertime, in the summertime when it gets too hot. So there's a lot to do in Lebanon in your spare time. You can, you know, go skiing, you can go to the beach. It's, you know, often referred to as the Paris of the Middle East. So to see people taking their time, Lebanese people taking their time to do this, I find encouraging, frankly.
Yeah, well, I would love to see other countries to have the same migrant workers kind of mobilize and do the same thing.
Well, you know, I was looking at a website called Ethiopian Suicides, and this is one of the sites that's referred to on that migrant worker website. And it gave, you know, the first story there, and Ahmed has got it up on his screen now. The first story is actually about a Sri Lankan woman who was forced to swallow 9 nails by her employer. And I think it gets to this idea of the dehumanization of the migrant worker, and they don't really have any recourse. So you see, actually the Sri Lankan ministry sent a delegation to investigate another stories of alleged rapes at a factory. They came out and said no, they don't believe that had happened, but they did highlight this other story. And it makes you think, you know, if a woman was moving to Lebanon from Calgary, maybe she wouldn't be running into these same kind of issues.
It's true. I mean, these videos were just uploaded this week, and they already have hundreds of views. And, you know, it goes without saying sometimes on this show, but, you know, anyone who's, you know, tapped into online knows that, you know, just that blog you mentioned, the Ethiopian blog that's highlighting these issues, or even these videos, really do have the potential to go viral and draw attention to issues that otherwise might not get attention. And you know, here we are discussing it miles away just because we found it online.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we're able to raise these kind of things, and I think it's the sort of thing that needs more conversation, because it's almost like, I mean, people talk about modern-day slavery, and there is actual modern-day slavery going on, but it's not like these people are being paid very well. So the fact that they can't move freely, the fact that they don't have papers nor the same rights, it's a step above.
It's like, it's based in slavery. I mean, we must admit it, and this is a global thing. You know, it's not just the Arab world, but there's also, you know, that can transition or, you know, kind of translate into a form of racism where you feel, well, who cares necessarily? It's not an active thought often. It's just, you know, subconsciously you're thinking, well, they're fine in their little world.
I think it's become a norm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to get into some deep issues today. Thanks for joining us in the pre-show. We're about to go live on our broadcast, so stay with us. We'll be on air in just a few. Hi, I'm Derek Ashong, and you are now in The Stream, a social media community with its own daily TV show. We're bringing you stories that are ongoing, global, and sourced from social media. Today, Voice of the Stateless, the Bidun of Kuwait expand their protests on Facebook, and a disturbing story out of North Korea that's gone viral. As always, our digital producer, Ahmed Shihab Eldin, is here looking out for your feedback. Also joining us on the couch is Sarah Hussain, business manager at Internews, an international organization that focuses on media development around the world. Sarah, welcome. So great to have you here.
Thanks, Derek.
Tell us a little bit about what you do at Internews.
Sure. Internews is an international organization. We do media development. We work specifically with empowering a lot of local media outlets, newspapers, radio stations, a lot of capacity building work. I specifically work in the Middle East, North Africa division as business manager.
Well, it's really good to have you here because our first story is actually sourcing from the Middle East. So I'm very interested to hear some of your thoughts on it. Remember, if you want to share stories that you are following, you can share them by tweeting us using the hashtag AJStream. Now, I want to go right to our first story now, and it's one that was actually suggested by a viewer, Busami M. Salem, who goes by the Twitter handle @SammySong, and it's about the Kuwaiti Bidun. The word Bidun means without, as in without papers, and it refers to the stateless people in Arab countries who have almost no rights nor privileges. In Kuwait, the Bidun are intensifying a campaign that is demanding full rights as citizens of the country. They've not only been protesting on the streets, but are now actively increasing their presence online. If you take a look at my screen, you'll see a number of people. This is a montage of people protesting for the rights of the Bidun. And I want to draw your attention to a specific image that is quite intriguing. This here is an image that really exemplifies what's going on in this case, because activists asked people on Facebook to flip their avatars or their picture as a gesture of solidarity with the Bidoon. The picture you see here is of Ahmed Al-Khulaifi, who came up with the idea by starting the hashtag Iqlib, meaning flip in Arabic. Now there's another image that I think is also worth considering. This one is a visual of a recent protest in Kuwait. Inspired by the Arab awakening, Bidoon protesters actually came out to demand equal rights, only to be pushed back by security forces. Now, the Bidoon in Kuwait number around 80,000 to 120,000, which is about roughly 10% of the Kuwaiti population. We also have another image that I think is worth taking a look at. It shows you how the people in Kuwait, how the Bidoon in particular, feel about this issue and the strength of those feelings. It's a picture from an earlier protest where the Bidoon compared the Kuwaiti government committee that's been tasked with handling their affairs to Nazis. The Bidoon cannot legally obtain birth, death, marriage, nor divorce certificates. The same applies to driving licenses, identification cards, and passports. So we're lucky to have joining us now via Skype a Kuwaiti journalist and blogger, Mona Karim, who contributes to Global Voices and Jadaliya.com. She's written extensively on the condition of the Bidoon in Kuwait. Mona, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the stream. I've got to ask you, we understand that a lot of Kuwaitis were given citizenship, about a third of the population in 1959, another third were given partial rights, and another third were excluded. Why were the Bidoon not granted citizenship in the 1950s?
Well, thank you for hosting me at first. Another thing, just to answer your question, the issue of Bidoon, some people go like, it goes back until 1920, and some go like it started after the independence of the country, because most of them actually are Bedouins, so they do not have enough documents. Some do have documents, but still the case is very complicated when it comes to the legal side of it. It's not about 1959, there is no specific date, this has been going for a long time, and the government tried to do it every year and so, but depending on the political life and the tension, things sometimes slip around. So some get the citizenship, some didn't. So that's why the cause is going off and on, and that's why there are campaigns trying to highlight it.
But Mona, let me ask you a question. If part of the issue is that there's a legal concern because they don't have adequate paperwork to get their citizenship, but because they're not citizens, they're not allowed to get common paperwork like a driver's license or a passport,
yes.
Isn't that simply relegating them to a permanent underclass status?
Yes, it's actually, when you meet the people, the Bidoon people, you would see that they are struggling in everyday life. Starting from 1986, they started to lose their rights gradually. Before that, they were almost like the Kuwaiti citizens, having all privileges except for the citizenship and some other minor ones. But 1986, up until now, they have been losing it. And now we're just going back and saying, okay, how about we go back prior to 1986, when people had the access to education and medication and all the documents that everyone is entitled to have naturally. Mm-hmm. So the thing with it is all human rights organizations, the people themselves go like, okay, how about first step that we actually get documents so we can move, so we can get a job, so we can get education, hire one especially. And that's why it's a very intense cause that needs to be solved. And some people are actually hopeful, especially that in the past years, for example, the Kuwaiti women got the rights to vote and went for elections. So people thought, okay, maybe we thought it's a losing cause, but it's not. The women were able to do it, the youth were able to change things in the political life, and maybe we can do the same.
Okay, sorry, go ahead. I just want to, I've spent a lot of time in Kuwait, my family's in Kuwait, and a lot of people feel like Kuwait has been regressing socially and politically. And we saw that, people came out and protested in February, the Bidoons for their rights. But what was the cause? And maybe that will tell us where we're headed. Because wasn't it when, Ben Ali was ousted, the Kuwaiti government and many Arab governments gave the concessions to their people in the form of $3,000 to each citizen and food stamps. And that really enraged the Bidoon. Is that not a cause for the protests? And what do you anticipate is going to happen moving forward? Seems we're having
a small issue with her, and we're going to come back to it. But just to clarify what you're saying,
right.
So when Ben Ali was ousted in Tunisia,
right.
You're saying that a lot of these Gulf states decided they wanted to do something to calm their
right.
people, and in this case, the Bidoon
right.
were left out of that. What are your thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, it's a reactive. My question to Mona also is, why now? this has been going on for 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
Was it the Tunisians that kind of sparked this thought? So yeah, kind of echoing what you were saying. But my main question is, why now, and where are we headed?
I feel like it was exacerbated by the fact that, all of a sudden, a very privileged group of people, Kuwaiti citizens are very privileged, their GDP is extremely high, higher than the United States. They all of a sudden are being given food rations, and free money, and for whatever reasons, they said it was to commemorate the anniversary of the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. So perhaps that's why, because you have all of a sudden stateless people in the numbers of 100,000.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point, because one of the issues that has been raised by Bidoon protesters is that they actually fought in the Gulf War. Many Bidoon participated in the resistance after Saddam Hussein's invasion, and they feel like, in some countries, even in the United States, there are opportunities for people who fight for the country to gain more fast-track citizenship, whereas it seems like they fought for their country, and then they're still stuck in this stateless situation.
What's also interesting is that they also support, they're like the legs of the country in many ways. They do a lot of the menial labor, the work that the Kuwaitis potentially may not be doing.
Right, which is perhaps all the more reason not to give them the rights if they're doing the work. Anyway, I'm not saying that, but perhaps that's the government's perspective, because it's a decade.
But you could also flip that and say, why not? Because they are doing the work.
Yeah. Well, let's bring it back to Mona. Mona, I'm glad that we have you back. We're curious. I just want to actually get into the role that social media has played in this. How has social media empowered the Bidoon to raise their concerns?
Okay. If we just have a look at what is the relationship between internet and the Kuwaiti society. The Kuwait was, back in the 90s, the second Arab country to have internet connection. At the beginning, the percentage of people who speak English was less than now, and the percentage of Arabic websites was also less. So what happened basically is that people thought internet is just a tool for entertainment. By the time this has evolved, and in 2000, the government, even the private companies, started to be more independent on online technology. And in 2005, the bloggers of Kuwait did something, I would say, a turning point, when they campaigned to have 5 electoral districts through their blogs, and then they took it to the street. And it happened. It went from 25 districts to 5 districts. And that just attracted people to the internet. They thought, okay, maybe it's not only entertainment. I would say that the Bidoon of Kuwait, they are financially less capable of, having the latest technology and all of that. And actually, they're even less capable of financially, I would say, than even the expats of Kuwait.
So are you saying in that case, Mona, that it's been Kuwaiti citizens and expats who have been advancing this online, as opposed to the Bidoon themselves?
No, actually, that's what I was going to explain. Just because of the Arab Spring and the image associated with the Arab Spring, that it has to do with the social media, the Bidoon thought, okay, how about we just use it? 3 years ago, when people were starting to go into Facebook in Kuwait, it was kind of like, I would say it was like a high school / university reunion. And this might sound funny, but some people thought it's an online dating website. So just months ago, the people thought, okay, we are Bidoon, we're going to go online through Twitter and Facebook, and we're going to campaign for it. So they did, and that's when, just 5 days ago, when that campaign happened about flipping the avatar.
Mona, I want to ask you one other question, because one of the elements that we had found during our research was this poster from one of the protests that basically says that people's animals have more documentation. It's got an image of a cat who has some kind of official papers, which real human beings, Bidoon, cannot get. I'm just curious, does the Kuwaiti media report on this, and is there any kind of bias in the media against the Bidoon? Unfortunately, that what this sign said is very truthful. People don't have documents of marriage or birth, death, divorce, a lot of things they lack. That's why that was
highlighted in the protest. When it comes to the mainstream media, and that's why the Bedouin are going for social media, is that mainstream media is more into, getting the reactions of parliament members, of politicians, or of the government representatives. They do not like to focus on the Bedouin, except for the columnists, of course. I think in Kuwait, comparatively speaking, we have more freedom to talk and write and so on. So there is space for that. But does the mainstream media in general focus and support the Bedouin cause? I would say not necessarily. The people of Kuwait, some actually support it and some actually have been misinformed, so they think it might hurt the demographics of Kuwait.
But Mona, I want to thank you for joining us and giving us some more insight into this particular story. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, I think this is really intriguing story. I mean, what's your take on the overall situation?
I mean, I'm sitting here just thinking how it would be great to see other stateless populations come up too. I really admire them. I think it's great that they're stepping up and turning to social media. And it's such a creative idea, flipping your avatar. I've never seen that done before. I don't know if historically that has been done. So, if you just look at other populations, the Sahrawis, the Kurds, there are lots of stateless populations out there. So,
well, hopefully this will raise more attention and people will be paying more attention to it. You can follow this story and learn more about it, as well as check out videos and links on our website, stream.aljazeera.com. We've got a lot of different information, including about this particular story on the Bedouin of Kuwait. Ahmed, what kind of things have people been saying to us online?
Well, today we got a story from Malaysia, from Akram Kadir, who said 14 people were arrested for wearing Bersi t-shirts and for distributing Malaysian flags. So the first question is, what is Bersi, for those of us who don't know? This is the video he shared with us. I'm going to start playing it. As you can see, protesters, or not protesters rather, just people gathering around this issue. Now, Bersi is essentially a movement that was formed in 2005 with the objective of pushing for a thorough reform of the electoral process in Malaysia. So it comprised of civil society organizations and political parties with the objective of campaigning for clean and fair elections. So here they are campaigning. I'm just going to fast forward. You see them getting into an altercation with the police. This all happened on Wednesday. And then eventually the argument gets heated and they get detained and taken away and arrested. So this movement has been going on for over 5 years, but I just want to highlight this one issue here. On July 9th, they're working towards an online campaign when they're going to be protesting across the world in solidarity with this movement. So they're using Twitter to get the word out there. Of course, they're using Facebook. Their goal is 50,000 likes. They're currently at 24,000. So hopefully, potentially by July 9th, they might get there. But the real issue is they have really clear demands that they're, kind of arguing and rallying for. So we're going to be following this story, and of course we want to hear from you, our viewers, and on Monday you will be hearing from people just like you in South Korea who have shared tweets and videos like this of an ongoing story that's capturing the country's attention. So Derek, back to you.
So this next story is something that I think is really interesting, just keeping on the Asian front. It's one of the most discussed topics on the internet this week, especially on news forums like Reddit. It's from North Korea and the possibility that extreme hunger could potentially be driving some people to extreme measures. A leaked 791-page police report that's been attributed to the North's Ministry of Public Security details rampant corruption, bribery, and even cases of cannibalism. We don't know if our document is authentic, and even if it is, there's no way of really knowing when these so-called cases happened. If you take a look at my screen, you'll see this gentleman protester with a quote that says, "Every 2.5 minutes, a North Korean dies of starvation." Well, let's look at some of the extreme measures that are alleged to have been taken. In this one particular count, references to cannibalism in this document are really disturbing. The Korean Herald reports that in one account, a male guard who could not bear his hunger killed his colleague using an axe, ate some of the human flesh, and sold the remainder in the market by disguising it as mutton. Again, there's no way for us to verify this, but what we can show you is an image that is from North Korea, and that is quite disturbing about children there. Foreign aid workers have said that the government has cut their daily rations for people to as low as 150 grams per person in some parts of the country as foreign donations collapse and international food prices continue to rise. Nutritionists say that this is well below the daily minimum requirement. Joining us now via Skype to discuss this further is Christine An. She's a policy analyst and commentator on Korean affairs. Christine, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the stream. First, I want to ask you, it's very difficult to verify some of this information. How credible are the reports of cannibalism that are coming out of North Korea?
Hi, Derek. I think that it's very hard to prove or disprove the veracity of these allegations, including that police report. My understanding is that report was leaked by a missionary group that is in South Korea, and it's unfortunate that there is a political bias by some of those groups whose goal is regime change in North Korea. There's another allegation that has been coming up about North Korea purchasing riot gear from China in anticipation of some sort of social unrest in North Korea. Again, that is from a source from the Chosun Ilbo. It's an unnamed source. So again, we don't have the actual source where we could verify whether this is in fact true or not.
Well, that actually brings up an interesting point, because we've been hearing reports that there is concern by the within the North Korean regime that something similar to the Arab awakening could happen there. How credible is that? How likely is it that such a situation could occur there?
I think it's very unlikely. I mean, I think that there is a more subtle kind of revolution that's taking place, and it probably parallels more what we've seen in China, sort of opening up to more market economy. But what is unfortunate about these kinds of sensationalized stories is that it's kind of distracting us from what we do know, which is from the international humanitarian aid workers. Whether it's through the UN World Food Program, whether it's through NGOs like Mercy Corps, whether it's the Swiss Development Corporation, we have actual figures that show that 6 million North Korean people will experience hunger. And so what do we need to do to respond to that? And unfortunately, the United States, which is, has enormous amounts of food and has the capability to send food aid to North Korea, has recently passed a bill to block food aid to North Korea. And I think that we have to actually respond immediately and urgently, especially given what we have known from the 1990s, what happened to North Korea.
Christina, I just on that note want to ask you a question, because a lot of the tweets coming in are actually trying to address the issue of the hunger. Ibu Kunmi is saying, what is causing hunger in North Korea? And on the issue of the U.S., we understand the U.S. House just passed a bill that would eliminate all food aid to North Korea on the grounds that it's mostly going to the military there. So do you think that this is a tactic to try and push the people to the point of breaking, perhaps because they're unable to see what's happening in the world around them in the form of, these other protests?
Well, I think that the question that you posed and what the tweet posed is a very important one. We have to understand the root causes of North Korea's food crisis. So I characterize them as the 5 H's. The first is the harsh weather that North Korea experienced last fall, similar to Pakistan, tremendous floods that wiped out, they received 44% less yield than they had the previous year. The second H is high food prices. North Korea is not alone in terms of facing lower purchasing power. So, for example, in 2009, they purchased about $60 million of food that they imported. Last year, they purchased $120 million of food, yet they were only able to receive 30% more. So high food prices is the second H. The third H is the hampering of the efforts of NGOs, especially in South Korea. So the president right now, Lee Myung-bak, has really pressured the South Korean groups from stopping sending food aid, fertilizer, seed, just the basic things for North Koreans to survive. Another is the halting of bilateral and multilateral food aid. But the last H that I think is really important is sort of the hanging the noose around North Korea through sanctions. And most people don't understand that the U.S. and North Korea and South Korea are still at war, and that is a very important context. And in fact, President Jimmy Carter recently went to North Korea, and he came back and he said, if I could just quote, that the last 50 years of deprivation of the North Korean people of adequate access to trade and commerce has been very damaging to their economy.
Christine, let me ask you a question. I just need a clarification from you, because you're talking about what the U.S. is not doing with regards to sending food aid. You've talked about the curtailing of fuel and other forms of aid coming from South Korea. But what responsibility does the North Korean regime have for the status of its own people?
They have full responsibility, just as every government has the responsibility to provide for its people. But you have to understand, North Korea is a very mountainous country. In fact, it's only been in the last 60 years that North and South Korea have been divided. In fact, historically, South Korea has been the breadbasket for North Korea. Only 13% of land in North Korea is arable for food production. So you have a situation where they don't really have the kind of land to be cultivating food. So, and then you have a situation where they have been under sanctions, international sanctions, for over 60 years. So it was okay in a time when they were part of a socialist trading bloc with the former Soviet Union and China, but in sort of this world where capitalism reigns, where the U.S. is the largest power in the global economy, and which countries are going to trade with North Korea? I mean, fortunately, they have China, but unfortunately, that is kind of pushing North Korea further into the court of China.
I want to actually get Sarah involved in this, because, Sarah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, here you have a situation where this country is obviously suffering. They also have one of the largest militaries in the world.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of the articles that we were reading is that a lot of the food aid is actually going to the military. But what about before? I mean, that's just what the articles were saying. I mean, it's alleged. It's alleged.
But that's
right?
a really good point, because one of the tweets asks, is it even possible to verify that food aid to North Korea would get to people who need it? Rekadel is saying, you know, a lot of people are saying, how do you verify anything coming out of this country?
Yeah. I just don't understand why leave, a population under 5 ounces a day per person, and that's not even a cup of coffee at this point.
So this is the case. And Christine, I want to ask you to stay with us, because we want to continue this conversation in our post show. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about it. I think you hit the nail on the head. Everyone is wondering what's happening to the food aid. How do you verify when you don't have people on the ground?
Exactly.
And how is it that they support this massive military establishment? And the people are hungry. We're going to dive deeper into these questions. We appreciate you joining us here. We're going to continue on our website, stream.aljazeera.com. You can participate in the conversation using the hashtag AJStream. We will see you online. Hi, welcome to our post show. We're talking about the situation in North Korea and the actual hunger that has been striking a number of people there. And we're very fortunate to have Sarah Hussein with us, Ahmed as well, and we have Christine Ahn, who is an expert on North Korean affairs. We're going to be posing some questions to her as well. Christine, I saw you shaking your head moments ago when Sarah was speaking about this issue of where the food aid goes and the possibility that it might be going to the military.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's one of those allegations that, I have not seen any humanitarian aid expert that has been on the ground working in North Korea saying that the food aid has been diverted. In fact, what I have seen is them saying that, from the point of entry to the point of delivery, and that the recipients of the food aid are women, pregnant women, and children. And so what we have also seen is longitudinal studies that cover a range of periods. So from 2004 to 2008 from UNICEF, where they've actually been measuring whether the impact of food aid has been a positive one. And yes, they have actually shown declining malnutrition rates, wasting. So it has been having a positive impact. And I think that these kinds of allegations that the food is being diverted to the military is trying to prevent is being used as a tool from conservatives that just want to further isolate North Korea, that want to sort of wash their hands of any responsibility to this looming famine that is facing North Korea
Let me ask you another question, Christine, because I think this is a very complex and it's a controversial issue. There are a number of countries in the world where people are dealing with issues of hunger and starvation. North Korea has got a massive military establishment. North Korea is also pursuing nuclear weapons technology, and avowedly so. This is not cheap. Why should the global community feel a sense of responsibility, in particular to address issues of hunger in North Korea, who is spending its money in military elements, when there's so many people who are hungry in other parts of the world?
Well, Derek, I think that you bring up a really good point about the massive amounts of military spending by governments. So if you compare the United States, if you compare South Korea, and you compare North Korea, and I'm talking about percentage, I'm not even talking dollar amounts, because as you can imagine, North Korea's GDP is quite low in comparison to these very wealthy countries. So if you look proportionally, it is astounding what the U.S. spends or what South Korea spends of its percentage of GDP compared to North Korea.
But the U.S. and
yes,
South Korea do not seem to be facing a massive famine as North Korea is. Right. So wouldn't it be their prerogative?
But just to set the record straight, Derek, we have 1 in 4 people in this country, in the United States, that go to bed hungry.
Right.
So, it's
Christine,
so easy to just point the finger at North Korea.
My interest is not, Christine, my interest is not simply to point the finger, but my interest is to be honest about the situation. And granted, we can absolutely have a conversation about hunger in any given country. Certainly, wait for a minute.
Okay.
We can absolutely have a conversation about hunger in any given country. However, you've made some very strong statements about the responsibility of other countries to address the issue of hunger in North Korea. And what I'm asking you about is specifically the responsibility of North Korea itself to address its own problems. You can't simply put that on the U.S. or South Korea may also have hunger issues or may be spending money on the military. What do you do when a nation is spending its money on the military as opposed to on its own people?
It is spending its money on lots of things, and it's not just on the military. So you kind of have to disabuse yourself that all the dollars of North Koreans, public dollars, go to the military.
Okay. So I want to, Sarah, I want to bring you back into that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Christine, go ahead.
So number 2 is, I don't know if you know about the military exercises that happen on a very regular basis where they simulate between the U.S. and South Korea, where they simulate an invasion of North Korea. Do you remember the North Koreans being on the axis of evil, where the Bush administration had made gestures towards preemptive strikes towards North Korea? You have to have a bigger picture. And so, yes, is it great that North Korea has nuclear weapons? I don't think so. I wouldn't want nuclear weapons for the Korean Peninsula, especially after what the Korean people endured during the Korean War.
Christine,
but do they have the right to defend themselves just like every other country? Yes.
So forgive me. I don't mean to interrupt you, but you mentioned the word context earlier. And I think that a lot of this, for all of us in the world at large, is that there is not much context with North Korea. And, growing up and hearing stories, even when I was younger, North Korea was this black hole. So the reason I mention this is because we have Andy Mara saying that a majority of DPRK, so coverage, is not authentic nor unverifiable, but the AP is opening up a bureau in Pyongyang. So my question to you, and frankly, Sarah, anyone chime in, do you think this will help give context?
The AP opening up an office in North Korea? Absolutely. Just as it has been wonderful to have humanitarian aid workers in North Korea actually give context, actually say that the people are real people that have real desires and hopes and dreams, just like everybody else in the world. There's so much vilification of North Korea. I've been to North Korea 3 times. I've had conversations with farmers who have looked back on the period of the famine in the 1990s, and they'll say, you know what, we were drowning. And in fact, when we had gotten on our knees and begged our historic enemies for food aid, and they did not do it until many years later, after Christine, up to 1 million people died.
Christine, I want to get Sarah involved in this conversation as well, and I have a large number of thoughts. First of all, there's been no comment made on the show thus far that all of the money that goes to North Korea goes to the military. But we're having this report, March 27, 2010. South Korean naval ship sank early Saturday after an explosion tore a hole in its bottom near a disputed sea border with North Korea. The allegation is that North Korea sank that South Korean ship. Obviously, the weapons that it used to do that cost money. So if we're looking at a situation where these people... Christine, hold on one moment for me, please. If we're looking at a situation where these people have whatever they choose to spend their money on, does it not come to an issue of priority? I would like your thoughts, and we'll come back to Christine.
I mean, that's kind of the main issue here is priority. What about the basic human rights? I mean, that's just to bring food, bread on your table. That's just what sustain the population and keep them going. So yeah, for me, it's a priority. Why is keeping your population hungry below the military and funding such missions?
I think there's so many countries. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Christine. Please respond.
Well, first of all, the Cheonan incident has not been completely proven that North Korea did it. In fact, there are two professors. One is Jae Jong-seo at Johns Hopkins University, and the other is a physicist from the University of Virginia. They've really challenged and questioned the so-called report that came out from South Korea that pointed the finger to North Korea. So that is definitely questionable. Yet South Korea is claiming that it's because of this sinking and because of the shelling of Yeonpyeong Island last November, if you recall, that these are the reasons why they're not sending food aid to North Korea.
And
so
are you saying that the shelling of the island? Are you saying that the shelling of the island is also in dispute, or simply the sinking of the ship?
It is in dispute because, and this gets very
I'm
complicated.
asking which one.
Is it possible to
I'm asking if you're speaking about the sinking of the ship or the shelling of the island, or both.
I'm talking about both, that yes, North Korea did shell Yeonpyeong Island.
Okay.
But it is still being disputed whether that is South Korean territory or North Korean territory. There is something that's called the Northern Limit Line.
Mm-hmm.
It was unilaterally drawn by the United States after the Korean War. North Korea didn't even know that this line had been drawn. But unfortunately, it violates the maritime borders law, where essentially from North Korea, within North Korean land, within 8 miles is considered North Korean territory. That's just general maritime law.
Christine, on that point, I just want to bring up something, because I think the larger, broader question that we're all kind of debating here is being highlighted by artist known as G right here on Twitter. He's saying there's the regime in North Korea and the people of North Korea. Two very different groups. We have an obligation to the people. Now, whether you agree with that or not, you know, even in Libya, with the NATO intervention in Libya, we see that there's a leader and there's the people, and it's always a delicate balance to decide whether to intervene or not and how to intervene. And Gutmang is actually mentioning this as well. I just want to get this comment in there. He's saying, how can you call yourself the Democratic People's Republic of Korea when there aren't even any elections, let alone all the other things happening in Korea? He's saying the propaganda level is ridiculous.
Well, my response is I'm absolutely in agreement that there is the people and there is the regime. And I'm just going to quote what Jimmy Carter said when he came back from North Korea. He essentially said that in almost any case when there are sanctions against an entire people, the people suffer the most and the leaders suffer least. I think that we have to remember that sometimes policies like sanctions actually go against advancing the development of the people, of the society. And, you know, if you really do want regime change in North Korea, as it seems that many U.S. policymakers and South Korean leaders want, then you need to have a society that is strong enough, that is healthy enough, that can engage, that can challenge the regime in power. But if you're going to have a society that is constantly struggling just to survive, then I'm not sure if those are necessarily the most ripe conditions for any kind of uprising in any country.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
No, I was going to say it works to their benefit. I mean, if the people are more concerned with bringing home food, then they're not going to be concerned with protesting the regime.
And if I could just make another point to what Sarah said, it's, you know, you have to think about, well, what about engagement? Have we ever thought engagement with North Korea could actually lead to improved human rights in North Korea? How come that question is never on the table?
Christine,
we were so close to engaging and signing a peace treaty with North Korea in 2000.
I just want to highlight very quickly the role of social media in all of this by mentioning that LiveJ, one of our contributors, has shared with us an investigating clip by South Korea's leading independent daily, Hank Yore, of the sinking of the Cheonan that you and Derek and all of us have been debating. So we're going to tweet that out. It's we're not going to have time to show it, but I just wanted to share with us that, this conversation is larger than just this studio.
Absolutely. Christine, thank you for taking the time. You've given a spirited defense of your position and your thoughts on this, and we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing that I think is definitely worth discussing. There's weight on both sides. You've got the people on one side, you've got the regime on the other side, and an international community that still hasn't figured out what to do with Korea.
But this isn't the first time. I mean, you see this in a lot of countries. They'll cut electricity, they'll keep their people hungry. It's a way to control the population, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be continuing to follow stories out of Korea, and we'll hopefully be following stories that you're suggesting to us. So keep in touch using hashtag AJStream. We'll see you online.